Foster, we've moved from the living room in your home to another part of the house. Where are we now?
This used to be called, and I guess it still is, the playroom. When the children were small, why, this was a game room. For example, we had a pool table, and pool was a great favorite for the kids in the neighborhood and all that kind of thing. And it's been kind of a rec area. And as a matter of fact, it's back in this, as you know, our house is rather long, and it's back in this area that we live. We don't spend much time unless, you know, it's a formal, dignified occasion in the sunroom or in the living room.
There are some most interesting architectural features of your home. One somewhere beneath us or nearby. What is that, and how did that come about?
What you're talking about is our fallout shelter. As I think I mentioned, and if I mentioned this on camera, what stopped me? Gina and I built this house in stages. You talk about someone who was strapped for money, it was us. And went to Mr. Charlie Barber. If I put this on camera yet? Went to Mr. Charlie Barber, who was a world-renowned architect. Matter of fact, studied 4 years in Europe. Marvelous man, tremendous man. And without going into some of the humorous details that I told you earlier, Mr. Charlie sent us to Williamsburg, and we asked him why. He said, just go to Williamsburg, then call me. So we came back. And to make a long story short, he said, what did you think of Williamsburg, Virginia? You know, old colonial Virginia. We said we loved it. He said, I thought you wanted a Williamsburg, modified Williamsburg house. So to make a long story short, this house, as you know, has quite a few square feet in it. You haven't been upstairs and some other places and so forth. And we built it in sections. The first section was only the first floor of the main part. Living room, dining room, study, and one bedroom and one bath. And that was the back door out there. And then we added later, after we got a couple of bucks, we added 3 more bedrooms and 2 more baths upstairs. And then we put on this addition here, which we're in, which is the family room and the so-called playroom. And then we added the carport, and then we replaced the asphalt tile with Vermont slate and 1 or 2 other things. So to make a long story short, the house is built according to the original plans, but it was built as a matter of financial necessity in stages. Underneath that part in the family room in there, you know, I asked you to jump up and down. It's reinforced, I guess it's about 30 inches thick, that Vermont slate that you were standing on. And I asked you to jump up and down on. That's over our fallout shelter. This was right after the days of the Russians introducing, you know, atomic weapons and so forth. And to make a long story short, it is under that part of the house. And we had bunk beds, and we had bottles of water and food and racks with provisions on them, anything that would permit us to survive a couple of 3 weeks. And it's got a bomb blast door on it downstairs. Well, the technology in respect to nuclear weapons is so enormously advanced that it would no longer be effective against the thermonuclear. And so we no longer use it as a fallout shelter.
What do you use it for now?
Well, you're putting my marriage at peril. Foster's storage place, but seriously, we're going to get that darn thing cleaned out, and I'm ashamed of it because it is a very, very interesting place. But we've got a water softener and water heaters, and our central heat is located down there, and so forth. But gosh knows what we'll find going through all that stuff.
Foster, earlier we were talking about Uncle Lamb, the mountain man. Did you recall who the other Supreme Court justice was who accompanied you?
And I'm going to give you your key now. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. Potter Stewart and Harry Blackman. Potter Stewart and Harry Blackman and their wives were our 2 Supreme Court guests, which we hosted with Uncle Lamb Owenby. And incidentally, just by way of comment, we became not close friends, but very, very good friends. And each of them was most especially Harry Blackman, were self-effacing types. They were just grand. My feeling is And I met an awful lot of people through my career that the really most important people are the ones that are less pretentious. And surely Harry Blackman and Potter Stewart and their lovely wives would fit in that category, just lovely people.
Foster, out of curiosity, how did these two celebrated Supreme Court justices react to Uncle Lem's comments from behind the door?
Oh, I was on the porch, and you'd really have to see, and I've got some pictures of it around here somewhere, with his bee gums, beehives. That was his source of income. And he had a very, very narrow porch, and very, 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 I mean, just primitive, just primitive. And I was standing on this very narrow porch, and they were standing out in the front yard right by the front steps, so they could hear everything that went on. And of course, when Uncle Lem said, "I don't have no use for them folks in Washington, go away," or whatever it was he said, I stepped out. I was humiliated and embarrassed. And the Blackmans and the Stewarts were doubled over with laughter. And one of them, I think it was Harry Blackman, said, "This is marvelous. This is the first time I've been rejected like this in years." You know, so two justices of the Supreme Court of the United States, you know, in Elkmont, Tennessee, for Pete's sake. But they were great, good sports. And as I say, we exchanged Christmas cards, and while they were living, I'd always have a little note, "Give Uncle Lem our regards," or, you know, something to that effect.
Foster, your lovely home is from one end to the other, decorated with fascinating items of memorabilia from your past. We've come to this corner of your house to focus upon just a few of them. I'm going to ask you if you would step back so that the camera can get a shot of the medals that are on the corner. As I understand it, one is the Purple Heart, one is the Bronze Star, which you were also awarded, which we had not mentioned before now, and of course the Silver Star that we talked about. I would like, if I may, to read from the citation that accompanied the Silver Star with the official description of the events that gave rise to your receipt of this most prestigious military award. When the force of an enemy banzai attack overran a portion of the battalion defensive perimeter within which the regimental staff was located and caused a platoon of men to withdraw into the perimeter seeking more tenable positions, Lieutenant Arnett, although a regimental staff officer with no command responsibility, immediately perceived that the enemy penetration endangered the entire battalion position, and leaving the relative security of his foxhole, ran forward to a position in front of the withdrawing platoon. Standing bolt upright, totally exposed, with utter disregard for the heavy enemy fire all around him, he rallied the platoon with his inspiring display of personal courage, and although receiving serious wounds, which later necessitated his evacuation to the United States, led the men in a counterattack which succeeded in retaking the platoon's position and killing approximately 20 enemy soldiers. Foster, medals can be no amount of compensation for your acts of heroism, but they are certainly symbolic of the contribution you made to your fellow officers and men on that occasion. Tell us a little bit about the military history and procedure of the medals, and how an award winner such as yourself receives them, and how they're displayed and worn.
Well, to make a very long story short, I showed you a frame replica of the various medals and awards in the study in there. And to make a long story short, they vary greatly by degree. For example, the Medal of Honor, and each one of the armed services has a different, it's a different Medal of Honor. And then the Distinguished Service Crosses, and then the Silver Star, and then there are, 60 or 70 other medals that are listed on that chart that have to do with administrative distinction, executive, expertise, and then other things designating, the theaters you've served in and so forth. But it's kind of interesting because to be awarded one of the three top medals, the Medal of Honor, the Crosses, and the Silver Star, you've got to have four things, and this is really important. Four things occur. The individual in question has to have the opportunity. He's got to have the instinct to respond to the opportunity. He's got to live long enough to accomplish something that his peers consider to be noteworthy, and he's got to have a minimum of two independent witnesses to that act before the award, the Medal of Honor, Crosses, or Silver Star can be awarded. I say this, and I say it profoundly and sincerely. There are a bunch of people, and I know this personally, a bunch of people who qualified for recognition of the highest order, but who did not have those four elements coincide in one point in time. We had in our tiny little parachute regiment, which was, as I think I've said before, just a historic outfit, we had two Medal of Honor winners. And if you had projected ahead of time, the fact that these guys would, Fryer and Perez would get the Medal of Honor, you'd say, you've got to be kidding. You know, those guys are troublemakers, jerks. Well, they, by golly, got it, and they deserved it. But there are at least an equal number of people that are entitled to that kind of recognition, but unfortunately, those four requisites didn't combine, you know, the four criteria that I mentioned.
I understand that from a period in your military service, you were a coach. Is that correct?
That's correct. My nickname, incidentally, in combat, everybody used a nickname. You didn't say lieutenant or sergeant or captain or corporal or major. You had a nickname. And I forgot to tell you, my nickname was Punchy because I was the boxing coach. And I think probably there was a medical basis for that nickname, too.
Here is a photograph from your collection, and if you could describe that for us.
This is the picture of the 511th Parachute Infantry Regimental Boxing Team. We won the New Guinea Championship. They're some of the greatest guys in the world. We had five classifications. We had ex-pros, that was one classification. We had semi-pros. We had first-rate amateurs. We had, you know, so-so amateurs, and then we had novices. But we had all these people here. And I kid you not, when the old man, the regimental commander, appointed me to be boxing coach to succeed a very fine boxer, Lieutenant P.O. Carter, from Mississippi. He said, Arnett, if you want to stay in this regiment, you're going to have to turn this boxing team's record around. You understand that? Yes, sir, whatever you say. But to make a long story short, we just had a great time. We became great friends. And some of these people I see on a yearly basis. Most of them are dead, but it's a tremendous bunch of guys from very top flight pro fighters, you know, pre-World War II. To you know, just kids come out that want to fight. Really, it was the spirit of the paratrooper. If he saw a fight going on, almost invariably he would say or think to himself, "Is this a private affair, or can anybody join?" I never will forget coming back one night from the movies. To make a very long story short, there was a lieutenant who shall remain nameless, and we were walking back to the tents. From the amphitheater. When I say amphitheater, boy, you talk about something that was crude. And to make a long story short, I said something to him that he didn't like, and the next thing I knew, from the back, I was on the ground. He really just decked me. Well, we had a hell of a fight, and the men, instead of trying to break it up, you know, they were enjoying it. To make a long story short, I ended up with a broken nose, and he ended up with 2 teeth out and 2 black eyes. And the old man called us in the next day, Hard Rock Algon, and he said, "Well, gentlemen, I understand we had a little frivolity last night." And the guy, well, I won't mention his name, we said, "Don't know what the colonel's talking about." He said, "Look at you. You look terrible. You look terrible." And he said, "Make a long story short, you," and named the other officer, "you're the garbage collector here until further assigned. And Arnett, I've got something special for you. You are going to be regimental mess officer. Well, that was just humiliating, humiliating. And make a long story short, I was a mess officer, the officers, division officers mess officer for about 2 months. And then the old man got a lot of pressure from General Swing, Joseph M. Swing, because he found out that I had taken my boxing team up to the division officers mess every time we won a match and fed them the officers' food. And he sent word to Colonel Haugen and said, "Get Arnett out of that damn mess hall. We can't stand him anymore." So I went back to the regiment.
But you took the team to a championship.
You're damn right we did. I'm very, very proud of that. Great guys.
Foster, in conversations with one of your friends, I was asked if you might remember some scientific experiments that you undertook in New Guinea involving the repeated exposure of uric acid to tropical wood and decomposition. Do you recall that?
No, I don't. Alternatively, I take the fifth. I take the fifth. You can't imagine how primitive New Guinea was. Dobadura, New Guinea, I kid you not. We would, one of our dear friends, we had 4 junior officers to attend, and one of them was a fellow named Walt Handlinger, died just last year before last, retired as a colonel, a great guy. And he would refer to one of our tent mates and say, "Arnett, what do you think about Joe and his fiancée?" Well, Joe was a very straight-laced kind of a guy, and I would say, I'd play dumb, I'd say, I don't know. He said, "Well, I understand his fiancée is running around like hell and misbehaving, et cetera, et cetera." And to make a long story short, it finally got the required result. The one who was being cheated on finally was aware that we were talking about his fiancée, so he invited us both out to have a fight over that. It was crazy.
Foster, among other photographs within your house, I selected this one, and if you would, tell us who those guys are.
Oh, that's one of the greatest guys I've ever known, Irby Jenkins, and Perry Mason and me. And as I remember, Irby was president of Tennessee Bar and invited Perry Mason down. And as I remember, and I'm not sure, I think I was general chairman of the convention in Gatlinburg. And to make a long story short, Raymond Burr was a joy to be with. He really was a great guy.
Thank you. There are also some interesting cartoons displayed in your home, and I think there's a pretty good story associated with these two. What is this one?
Well, this is a cartoon that was given to me. My Jean, my 4-foot 10-inch wife, is a great needle pointer, and a good friend of ours had a cartoonist draw this up. And it shows 2 guys and a picture of a painting of Jean on the front page before a judge on the bench. And it says, the caption is, "She was selling obscene needlepoint." Jean was a great needle pointer. So in response to that,
there was some retaliation, I
Jean
think.
retaliated, and she had a cartoonist draw this cartoon showing an old man with a long nose and a wife in bed with the covers pulled up, and the caption on the bottom of it, directed toward me, of course, is, "Dear God, please give Mr. Perfect a tiny flaw."
Foster, on this table is the William Criss Award, and I know this is something that you treasure, and if you would tell us about that.
Did you know Jack Criss with Keener Dental Supply? Well, this was his older brother, William Wiley Criss. I was the first winner of the Criss Memorial Award given by his parents. To make a long story short, Bill Criss was a graduate of the UT Law School and was with the old firm of Green, Webb, and McCammell, before the war. He was called in early under the Thompson Act as a lieutenant, and he was just a historic guy. He was very finely boned, if you understand what I mean, unlike me, for example. And he had a great bass voice, and he was very much sought after at fraternity parties where he would sing the big bass drum and this kind of just a tremendous guy. And one of my great regrets, because he sort of became my mentor or a hero. And one of my great regrets is that when finally we got out on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1944, to Tacloban, finally broke out from being encircled and cut off and so forth, I knew that Bill Chris was with the 77th Infantry Division, which was within 5 miles of where I was, and this was Christmas Eve. And to make a very, very long story short, I was eating, and literally, I say all of us were eating once an hour. In other words, we were so gaunt, we'd damn near starved to death. And every hour we'd eat, and I said to myself, I know where Bill Chris is, I've got to go see him, but I'll wait till tomorrow. But tomorrow was Christmas Day, and we got on a duck and went around the other side of Lady Island, and then got on the hospital ship Marigold and shipped back to New Guinea and the Matsonia back to the United States. So I did not seize that opportunity because I didn't anticipate they were going to ship us out. Make a long story short, Bill ended up with the 77th Infantry Division on Okinawa and was killed. He was buried in Arlington. Later his body, I beg your pardon, he was buried on Okinawa, and later his body was disinterred or whatever and brought back to Arlington Cemetery. But he was an elegant guy in every sense of the word, personally, as a lawyer, you name it, just a marvelous human being and an exemplar for everyone who knew him, literally.
Foster, some of the greatest praise and highest admiration for you comes from those whom you have represented throughout your legal career. And if you would tell us a little bit about this memento, which hangs here in your home.
Well, this is involves some script. Script was company manufactured currency or money, and this was script generated by the Blue Diamond Coal Company to pay their miners. As opposed to money. In other words, script was available. You could buy it at the company store. I'm sure you've heard that phrase. Where, the industry, the coal mining industry, didn't have the money to pay these people. So to make a long story short, I've forgotten, and please forgive me, I think we had 37 men killed within 40 hours or something in the Scotia mine. And Bert Combs, Judge Combs of Louisville, and I were lead counsel, and we processed all those cases, and I kid you not, that was quite an experience in northeastern Kentucky.
Who gave you this?
But when it was over, Gordon Bonneman, chairman of the board of Blue Diamond Coal Company, gave me this script here, and underneath it on a brass plaque, Foster Arnett, persistence finds money. October 1980, November 1985, Blue Diamond Coal Company. Obviously, as the president, chairman of the board of Blue Diamond Coal Company, why he was grateful that we were able to luck out. I made the final argument to each one of those jars. Don't hold it against Blue Diamond because they can't afford a good lawyer. I'm just doing the best I can.
Well, it could have said, proud to have you as a coal miner's lawyer. There's another one which is also very, very interesting, and you have told me about it in the past. There was a time in our country where there was a particular type of litigation. Tell us a little bit about that and your involvement.
Well, to make a long story short, in the 60s and very early 70s, the trampoline lawsuits were very popular. You know what a trampoline is? You go out and bounce up on it. It's particularly attractive to young people. And to make a long story short, there were a considerable number of major lawsuits involving injuries sustained while trampolining. These kids would go out and jump up and down the trampoline. They were all young. They were all, had athletic prowess, and the injuries were almost unimaginable. They almost always involved cord lesions up here. And, little people come in like that, formerly fine athletes or very athletically inclined and, horrible in a wheelchair and so forth. And to make a long story short, George Nissan, who really, he was a former Olympic champion himself, and who really pioneered the trampoline industry were just taking a beating. I mean, Nissan Corporation was just being eaten alive by these terrible, terrible lawsuits. So Mr. Nissan called me to come out to Iowa to meet with him, and I went out there to meet with him. I sat down. He was a little fella. All gymnasts, good gymnasts, are little people. They're thin, they're small, they're short. And for about 2 hours, he just gave me hell and the legal profession in general, because, as I say, Nissan Corporation on these trampoline lawsuits have been taking a beating, and just gave me the devil. And I said something to the effect, Mr. Nissan, I came out here at your invitation. I'm very, very happy to be here and so forth. I happen to disagree with a lot of what you said. I'm not good enough to guarantee results, but I am good enough to promise best efforts. And if you want to talk about these trampoline cases that are coming up, I'm glad to do that. If not, without attempting to offend you, why, I'll just leave. I'll shake hands and leave. He said, Arnett, sit down. So we started talking about these trampoline lawsuits, and to make a long story short, he brought me in to try them all, and I tried a number of them and didn't lose a single one. And two things. One, they have changed the warning signs and some of the technology on trampolines, so you never hear of a trampoline lawsuit anymore. And number two, he gave me this plaque, which particularly in view of the fact that he despised lawyers. It reads, Foster D. Arnett, World's Greatest Attorney, Nissan Corporation, November 24th, 1975. George was a great guy.
Foster, here's another photograph of, gee, I recognize you and Gene, but who's the guy in the brown coat?
President Gerald Ford. We were, I think, at Colorado Springs, as I recall, Colorado Springs. And if you look closely, and I don't think the camera can see it, you'll see I'm in the background, and my 4'10" wife is up front and looking adoringly at President Gerald Ford, who was our guest there. I was president of an organization that invited him. And I put up on this picture, and Jean took it down, oh, Mr. Wonderful. In other words, her adoring gaze at President Gerald Ford.
Foster, this photograph brings up the subject we haven't touched on in our conversation this afternoon, and that is your involvement with politics. What fascination did politics hold for you, and why did you become involved in politics as a young man?
Well, I think it's terribly important in a government of, self-governing people that we each have a duty and a responsibility to be involved in politics. And I'm ashamed to tell you that the last few years I have not been involved as much as I used to be. But to make a long story short, Knox County historically, in years past, I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago, was heavily dominated Republican. And they had the Knox County Republican Club. And to make a long story short, they did not, and it was their right, they did not move over for new leadership. So Guy Smith IV and Hugh Neal and several of us formed the Volunteer Republican Club as a adjunct to, not in competition with, the Young Republicans. And we had some great times. We started off with our principal mission was poll watching. You know what poll watching is? And I never will.
Well, tell us.
Poll watching is where we would send our members out to some of the, golly darn, I've forgotten. There was a nickname for it, the floating wars, where the boats were bought and paid for, and where a lot of the chicanery was going on. And we undertook, all of us young, all of us thought we were tougher than we really were, and we undertook to clean up this rampant, vote buying and vote intimidation and so forth. I never will forget, it's a prominent man, so I won't mention his name. He was involved as one of our members, and to make a long story short, we got a frantic call, and I was on the circulating squad to check, poll after poll after poll. He was a poll watcher, and very famous name here, and I won't mention that. A bully, if there ever was one, had George backed up against the wall. He was going to whoop him, for being a poll watcher. And so I went down there, and George against the wall, hell of a nice guy. I mean, a very cultured guy. And this bully had him backed up against the wall, and I touched the bully on the shoulder. I said, "Come over here." He said, what do you want?" I said, "George is a pole watcher. I'm the fighter. Now, if you want to fight, why, let's you and me just go out there. Come on, let's just go right now." Well, to make a long story short, that was the Commerce Avenue fire hole. I'll never forget that. But it was really kind of raw. And then subsequently, largely as a result of that exposure, and there was a considerable amount of exposure, I was a delegate to the Goldwater Convention at the Cow Palace in California. Incidentally, I think history is going to prove what I've been assured of, a marvelous, wonderful, wonderful man.
Foster, how and why did you resist the encouragement of your friends to run for office?
Well, I guess for a lot of reasons. One reason is that, in my judgment, and you know, this is fraught with error, in my judgment, I cannot live as well as I like to live on a politician's salary. And I'm not very bright, and I've got a lot of testimony that'll support that. He isn't very bright, but I am honest. And to make a long story short, I love the law. I was excited about the law. I was very, 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 very fortunate. And incidentally, luck plays a large part in this. I was extraordinarily fortunate to prosper at the law, and frankly, next time I'm going to either inherit money or marry money. The heck with working and practicing law.
Foster, thank you so much for allowing us to spend the afternoon with you here in your lovely home, and I can attest that throughout your career you have remained dedicated and a testament to the word inscribed upon the ring that your parents gave you, and we thank you on behalf of the bar in Tennessee for all that you have done and for what you will continue to do and represent for all that is good about being a lawyer.
Well, I thank you and Barry very, very much. I'm extraordinarily grateful. I'm very, very flattered. I think you're wrong as heck with your assessment, but thank you very much. I value our relationship immensely.
Thank you, sir.